I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to give you a little sense of why I wanted to have David Peterson on the show and put it in perspective of a couple of other shows that I want to have this week. The Liberal Party is having a convention in early September, and there is a leadership review. I am not going to take any position on that leadership review for probably obvious reasons if people know my last name. But I do want to talk a little bit about what David said, because I think to connect up with him, because it's 40 years since he was elected Premier of Ontario, and I think he's one of the best premiers that we've ever had. And I think for several reasons, and I think those are the reasons that we should be thinking about when we think about the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the NDP, whatever party when going forward. We talked about leadership and how critically important it is to have someone that's got leadership capabilities and qualities. We talked about charisma, and I think that that's pretty important. We talked about experience, and David had wealth of experience, both in business and also in the charitable sector, and then in politics. Running in the second leadership, being a MPP, etc. Unbelievably connected. He was connected with business. He connected with people. He connected with workers and helped them, and they helped him. And so I think that connection back and forth ended up being critically important. He called himself a social progressive, and I think that was one of the keys that Ontario was ready for his social progressivity. But he's also talked about balancing the budget. And so therefore, I won't call him a fiscal conservative, but I think he was prudent from a fiscal standpoint. And he talked about having the best cabinet. And so therefore, I think teamwork ended up being key for David Peterson. He appointed some really capable people to cabinet. He attracted really capable people of running. He mentioned some of the names. If you've been in politics for a while, I think you'd recognize that he had a really strong front bench. He also had a accord with the NDP, so he was willing to cooperate. He was willing to work with others, and then finally, from my standpoint, he made the most brilliant decision by getting my second cousin Bob Nixon involved in his cabinet as his treasurer. Someone who had been leader previously twice before him, and logically, you might have been jealous of the elder statesman and not wanted him in cabinet, but David wanted his expertise, and his expertise in a very senior manner. He talked about how he was friends with Robarts, a Conservative premier. So I think that teamwork ended up being one of the keys of David Peterson. I worked hard for David Peterson. I was his youth chair. I knocked on doors even when he was just an MPP before he ran for leader with him in London, Ontario. I was a student at University of Western Ontario at the time, and saw him work incredibly hard, which I think is another thing that is worth mentioning about hard work. David was willing to work hard, and he worked really hard. He knocked on an incredible amount of doors, and he connected with people at doors. I was surprised how many people knew him when we knocked on doors. I think he is a great example of the kind of leadership qualities that we need, and I think are lacking. And I'm not suggesting in the Ontario Liberal Party, but I think in politics generally, we don't see the kind of leadership that David Peterson had. And I think that's a shame because I think he's emblematic of the kind of leadership. I think Brian Mulroney was that kind of leader, even though I disagreed with some of the things that he was all about. I think that John Turner was that kind of leader. And I think we've had those kinds of leaders in the past. And I hope that Mark Carney, for sure, ends up being that kind of a leader for our country, given that he's been elected as prime minister. Anyway, I wanted to put this in perspective with an example of one of the prime leaders from the past. I'm going to try to interview a couple of other prime leaders to get their perspective on their time in politics, their time in leadership, and what they think makes a good leader. I'm going to have a couple of other people on this topic. Stephen Adler is going to come on my show tomorrow. He is a conservative, and he's written a really interesting article about what he thinks about the Liberal Leadership Review. And it's an interesting point of view. And then on Thursday, I'm going to have Wendy Sukier, talking about AI and innovation, because I think one of the big opportunities and risks that we have in Ontario is how we adopt AI and how we become and maintain an innovative economy. Because I think we've lost some of the productivity, prosperity, and innovation agenda that Dalton McGuinty actually really brought to this province and that we need to have. And then I'm going to have on Friday a local activist, Roberta Tevlin, talking about electoral reform because she thinks that that's more important than who the leader is. And that makes it kind of interesting that she thinks so passionately about the need for electoral reform and that should be one of the big policy positions taken by the Liberal Party in this coming convention. So